Have you ever thought you were doing everything right only to find out later that you were way off target? Have you ever launched yourself into a project with excitement and motivation only to discover that all your amazing ideas have had no impact on anyone's life? Have you ever felt that you were building your life on a reliable and right foundation, a peaceful place for you and for your family when sudden upheavals caused your dream to fall apart? Have you ever wondered, how can I be a grateful person if I don't get what I want? If these are thoughts you have had, I invite you to watch this message because I believe the things said here will be significant to you. Besides this message, you can find many others on our website on the front page. Just click on the ANCF TV box and you will be able to watch all the videos. Today we will take a look at another relevant aspect of your relationship with God: gratitude. Take a look at Hebrews chapter 12 from verse 18. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned to death. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Wow, this is a fantastic passage, such mysterious, exciting words. And I'd like to explain what is happening in this passage by telling you two personal stories. It was an exciting time when we moved to Vancouver on the west coast of Canada a few years ago. Only when we got to the city did we realize how wonderful it is. No wonder it's considered one of the best cities in the world to live in. We arrived in April, so springtime, and the city was simply beautiful. We promptly got one of those small guides with Vancouver's main attractions. There were so many things to see. The snow-capped mountains, the forests, the oceans, the waterfront walks, downtown, Stanley Park, the gardens, restaurants, museums and galleries. And of course, the beautiful multicultural aspect of the city, with people from all over the world. Every time I think about the city I live in, I wonder what the new Jerusalem would be like. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting any kind of parallel between Vancouver and the New Jerusalem as described in the Bible. I would never do such a thing. I'm just saying that this wonderful city promised in the New Testament is so full of exciting and welcoming features that we must find it overwhelming. See, for instance, the contrast the writer presents between two mountains, Sinai and Zion. The first is the place of the Old Covenant, where Moses got the law from God, and it represents power and commandment. The second, also important, is the central area of Jerusalem, the hill captured by David and made it first into the royal city, and then the place of the great temple. The contrast between both mountains is interesting. Mount Sinai, the writer doesn't mention its name, but it's evident in the passage, was a terrifying sight, burning like a volcano, dark with clouds, roaring with strong winds. And as if that's not enough, out of the mountain came a trumpet blast, and then a voice from heaven could be heard at the foot of the mountain, frightening the people even more and warning that nobody, not even an animal, should come anywhere near the mountain. So holy was it. Now, the point about Mount Zion and the living God whose home it is not that holiness doesn't matter, but that a new way has been found and accomplished, through which the holiness you couldn't attain under the Mosaic law has at last been achieved. You see, the writer is telling us that those who live in the city are not those who have simply been told to come as they are, but those in whom the lavish grace of God has worked such a cleansing, such transformation that they now belong by right, although still by sheer grace, within the holy city itself. The difference is subtle, isn't it? But we must get it right. There are lots of angels in the city, and this time they are there not to give the law to people, but to celebrate the fact that what the law had not been able to do has been accomplished through the Son of God. And this is fantastic because the fact that God is named here as the judge of all, verse 23, is not meant to be a fearsome thing. No, of course not. Instead, it is to be celebrated. Everybody deep down wants the world to be put right. It doesn't matter if they believe in God or not. It doesn't matter if they are religious or not. Everybody wants to live in a just and fair society. And that is why we see so many people involved in or organizing protests all over the world. They want to live in a better world. And they are trying to make their voices and complaints heard. Everybody wants to live in a better world. The thing is, for this fair and just society to happen, the writer tells us that God has worked a plan for the spirits of the righteous to be made perfect. God intends to bring people to full humanity. That is, sin will be dealt with, consciences will be purified, and all of life will be brought into perfect and complete conformity and adequacy with God's design and plan for the entire creation. And what is Jesus in all this talk? Well, the crowning glory of the New Jerusalem is represented in the figure of the Messiah, the Son of God. He is the one through whom the new covenant, when all sins are forgiven, has been established. And that is why this time the blood calls not for vengeance, as Abel's did in Genesis 4, but for full forgiveness and cleansing. It is indeed a dramatic, exhilarating, glorious picture. Now, what really strikes us most is the affirmation that those who now live by faith and hope have already, in a sense, arrived at this heavenly city. What? What are you talking about? Well, he says that people who believe already belong there. When they pray to and worship Jesus, they are already welcome before God's throne. I know, now you must be asking yourself, does my life of prayer and worship, whether alone or with my fellow believers, carry the sense of joy and excitement that comes bubbling out of these verses? And if not, why not? But then comes the second part of this passage, from verses 25 through 29, and with it my second story about Vancouver. The first time I got to Regent College, where I took one of my master's degrees, I was startled by a polite little card on my desk. I am quite used to fire regulation, but this was different. The card read, "Are you prepared for an earthquake?" Of course not, I told myself. All I now remember is that I was supposed to hide under the table in case the ceiling fell in. And much good that will be, since I was larger than any table around. A real earthquake is, of course, one of the most frightening events anyone can experience. But the most critical point in this passage is the striking promise of the earth and heaven being shaken directly by God. It is part of God's plan to take His creation and make it at last what He always intended it would be. When we link this affirmation to the book of Revelation, chapter 21, we realize that the present heavens and earth must undergo their own radical change, almost like death and new birth. But it is a transition, not destruction. And here, the book of Hebrews uses a different image for this transition, with the same result at the end. Heaven and earth alike must be shaken, and in such a way that everything transient, temporary, secondary, and second-rate may fall away. Then the new creation based on Jesus himself and his resurrection will shine out all the more brightly. But look, there's also a warning here. If people who refused to listen to Moses found themselves in dire trouble in the days of Jesus, what will happen if people now refuse to listen to the one who is so much greater than Moses? Did you get the point? God has not stopped being holy because he is merciful. God hasn't changed a bit. It is instead that Jesus has opened a new and living path right up to his Father. Why is this so important? Because only when you remind yourself of God's holiness and righteousness do you fully appreciate the significance of what Jesus achieved on the cross. If I speak of God without stressing his all-consuming holiness, the meaning of the cross is downgraded in proportion. Hebrews, in line with the rest of the New Testament, celebrates the accomplishment of Jesus in his sacrificial death precisely because its view of God has not changed from the central Jewish belief we find in the Old Testament. God is the same. He is the same God who has now in Jesus brought his saving plan to a triumphant conclusion. So how can you respond to all that God has done for you then? Well, the appropriate response is gratitude and worship. This is all that you need to do. Have you by any chance been wrestling with what we sometimes call the good things of life? Food and drink, money and possessions. Well, perhaps this struggle has existed in your life for some time now. As you certainly know, these things can become severe temptation if pursued for their own ends. There is a chance that you have at times found yourself led in the direction of renunciation, setting aside all the interest in and claim on these things, almost going the route of asceticism. However, I'd like to suggest you to look at them not as bad things. Pursue them, not in an idolatrous fashion, but in gratitude. And why? Because thanking God for what you have is the way to keep the things of this world in proper perspective. That way you can never turn them into idols, nor can you make the mistake of supposing that when God made the world, he made trash, which we can ignore or sneer at. If this is so in the present world with all its ambiguities, how much more have we to be grateful for the world that is to come, the world that we have been promised as our true inheritance. True gratitude, both for the present world and for the world to come, is the most profound form of worship, reaching places which the entire sacrificial system of the Old Testament never could. Let me finish this message by mentioning something you may not have yet observed. When you bow down before the living God and thank him from the bottom of your heart for what he has done and for what he will do, it is as though you are a priest in the temple, offering the purest, most unblemished sacrifice, only much, much more so. That is the privilege of being a follower of Jesus, the Messiah. There is the life to which our fiery God now calls us. And when you realize how great this is, it will change your life. All the best to you and your family. Bye now.